It was a perfect summer day in the quiet neighborhood of Oakwood Heights. The sun shone brightly in the clear blue sky as the Johnson family busied themselves with preparations for their annual family gathering. Marcus Johnson, a 42-year-old high school history teacher, wiped sweat from his brow as he set up the large grill in their backyard. "Honey, can you check if we have enough ice?" Marcus called out to his wife Tanya, who was arranging colorful paper plates and cups on the picnic tables they had rented for the occasion. Tanya Johnson, a pediatric nurse with a warm smile and kind eyes, nodded and headed inside their modest two-story home. The couple had lived in this neighborhood for nearly 8 years, and their annual family gathering had become something of a tradition. Their two children, 14-year-old Zoe and 11-year-old Jamal, raced around the yard hanging streamers and balloons from the trees. The family had spent all week cleaning the house and yard, making sure everything was perfect for their relatives who would be traveling from various parts of the state to join them. "Dad, when is Uncle Ray getting here?" Jamal asked, his eyes bright with excitement. Uncle Ray was famous for his magic tricks and always brought the best presents. "He texted that he's about an hour away," Marcus replied, arranging charcoal in the grill. "Why haven't you helped your sister set up the speakers?" By noon, cars began to pull up in front of the Johnson home. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and grandparents arrived carrying dishes of homemade food and gifts. The air filled with laughter and excited chatter as family members who hadn't seen each other in months embraced and caught up on life events. Marcus's mother, 68-year-old Gladys Johnson, arrived with her famous sweet potato pie and immediately took charge of the kitchen. Tanya's brother James brought his new girlfriend to meet the family, and Tanya's sister Michelle showed off photos of her newborn baby. The backyard soon bustled with activity. Children played tag and basketball in the driveway, while adults gathered in groups, sharing stories and memories. Marcus fired up the grill, and the mouth-watering smell of barbecue ribs and chicken filled the air. Tanya had set up a buffet table with salads, cornbread, mac and cheese, and other family favorites. The gathering was lively, but not excessively loud. Music played from portable speakers at a reasonable volume, and everyone was mindful of keeping their voices down when telling particularly exciting stories. The Johnsons had always been considerate neighbors and made sure their celebrations didn't disturb the peace of the community. Unknown to the happy family, their new neighbor was watching the gathering with growing irritation. Karen Wilson had moved into the house next door just 3 months ago. She stood at her window, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line as she observed more cars parking along the street. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself, tapping her foot impatiently. "There must be 20 people there already. How many more are coming?" As the afternoon progressed, Karen's annoyance turned to anger. She had planned a quiet weekend at home and felt that the Johnson family's gathering was disrupting her peace. The fact that most of the guests were black made Karen even more uncomfortable, though she would never admit this to herself. Little did the Johnson family know that as they celebrated with their loved ones, a storm was brewing next door, one that would soon threaten to ruin their special day, but would ultimately lead to unexpected consequences for everyone involved. Karen Wilson paced back and forth in her living room, occasionally peering through her blinds at the Johnson family gathering. The party had been going on for 3 hours now, and her irritation grew with each passing minute. The smell of barbecue wafted through her open window, and the distant sound of R&B music floated in the air. "This is absolutely unacceptable," Karen muttered to herself as she watched another car pull up to the curb. "Don't these people know this is a respectable neighborhood?" Karen was 47 years old, recently divorced, and had moved to Oakwood Heights seeking peace and quiet. In her mind, the neighborhood's property values were at stake with these kinds of gatherings. She had chosen this suburb specifically because it had seemed so orderly and clean during her house hunting visits. She picked up her phone and took several photos of the cars parked along the street. Then she joined her neighborhood Facebook group and typed out a furious message. "New neighbors hosting enormous party. Cars everywhere, loud music, possible drinking. Is this what our neighborhood is becoming?" Several neighbors responded quickly, but not with the sympathy Karen expected. "Those must be the Johnsons. They have their family reunion every summer. They're great neighbors," wrote one. "They always clean up afterward, and the noise is never past 9 p.m. Never been a problem," added another. Karen's face flushed with anger as she deleted the app from her phone. She would have to take matters into her own hands. Meanwhile, in the Johnsons' backyard, Tanya was showing her elderly aunt to a comfortable chair in the shade. Marcus was flipping burgers on the grill while telling jokes with his cousins. The children had organized a water balloon toss, their laughter ringing out as balloons burst and splashed them. This turned out even better than last year, Marcus said to his brother-in-law James. "I'm glad we could get everyone together." James nodded. Mom would have loved seeing all the grandkids playing together like this. Their conversation was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of a throat being cleared loudly. They turned to see Karen standing at the edge of their yard, arms crossed and foot tapping impatiently. "Excuse me," Karen said, her voice sharp. "Do you realize how disruptive this party is becoming? There are cars all over the street." Marcus set down his spatula and approached with a friendly smile. "Hi there. You must be our new neighbor. I'm Marcus Johnson." He extended his hand. Karen ignored his outstretched hand. "I don't care who you are. I care about the noise and the traffic problem you're causing. I can barely hear myself think." Tanya joined her husband, her welcoming smile fading as she sensed the hostility. "We're sorry if it's been inconvenient. We did put notices in everyone's mailboxes last week about our annual family gathering." "Well, I never received any notice," Karen snapped, though the truth was she had thrown away what she thought was junk mail without reading it. "We'll be wrapping up by 9 tonight," Marcus assured her. "Would you like to join us? We have plenty of food." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "Join you? Absolutely not. I want you to end this now. There must be 40 people here. It's against neighborhood regulations." Some of the Johnson family members had begun to notice the confrontation. Conversations quieted as people watched the exchange. The children stopped their game, sensing the tension in the air. "There are no regulations against family gatherings," Marcus explained calmly. "We've checked with the HOA, and we're following all noise ordinances." Karen's face reddened. "Well, we'll just see about that." She pulled out her phone. "If you won't end this voluntarily, I'll have to call someone who can make you." As she stormed off toward her house, Tanya and Marcus exchanged worried glances. Their perfect day was about to face its first real challenge, and they both knew that Karen's anger wasn't really about noise or parking. It was about something far more troubling. The Johnsons tried to maintain the festive atmosphere despite Karen's threats. Marcus pulled Tanya aside, away from curious relatives who had witnessed the confrontation. "Should we be worried?" Tanya asked, her voice low. She seemed really determined. Marcus squeezed his wife's hand. "We haven't done anything wrong. Let's just enjoy our day and deal with whatever happens." But Tanya had a feeling in her gut that trouble was coming. She discreetly took out her phone and checked that it had enough storage space for video recording. Years of dealing with difficult situations as a nurse had taught her to always be prepared. Back in her house, Karen paced furiously as she dialed 911. When the dispatcher answered, she put on her most distressed voice. "Yes, hello. I need to report a major disturbance in my neighborhood," Karen said, peering through her blinds. "There's an unauthorized block party happening next door with dozens of people. They're being extremely loud, and I think I smell marijuana. There might be underage drinking too." The dispatcher asked for her address and details, which Karen provided eagerly. "How many people would you estimate are there?" the dispatcher asked. "At least 50, maybe more," Karen exaggerated. "They've taken over the whole street. I feel unsafe in my own home." After hanging up, Karen smiled with satisfaction. She imagined the party being shut down, the Johnsons embarrassed in front of their family and friends. That would teach them a lesson about moving into her neighborhood. Meanwhile, Grandma Gladys was telling stories about Marcus as a child, making everyone laugh. The younger children were now playing a game of freeze tag, while teenagers sat in a circle sharing social media posts. The adults continued to eat, drink, and enjoy each other's company. Marcus's brother David pulled him aside. "What was that about with the neighbor?" Marcus sighed. "New neighbor, apparently not happy about our gathering." David frowned. "You think she's really going to call the cops?" "Wouldn't be surprised," Marcus replied. "It wouldn't be the first time someone like her has a problem with people like us enjoying ourselves." David nodded in understanding. Both brothers had experienced similar situations before. About 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up slowly in front of the Johnson home. Two officers stepped out, Officer Rodriguez, a Latina woman in her 30s, and Officer Bennett, a black man in his 40s. "Here we go," Marcus said quietly to Tanya. "I'll handle this." "We both will," she replied, subtly positioning her phone in her hand. As they walked toward the front yard to meet the officers, Karen emerged from her house with a triumphant look on her face. She rushed over to the officers before the Johnsons could reach them. "Thank goodness you're here," Karen said loudly. "As you can see, this is completely out of control. They've turned our peaceful neighborhood into a block party." Officer Bennett surveyed the scene. Families eating at tables, children playing, music at a reasonable volume. He exchanged a glance with his partner. "Ma'am, are you the one who called this in?" Officer Rodriguez asked Karen. "Yes, and as you can see, it's exactly as I described, completely chaotic." By this time, Marcus and Tanya had reached them. "Officers, I'm Marcus Johnson. This is my home and my family gathering." Officer Bennett nodded. "Mr. Johnson, we received a complaint about noise and possible illegal activities." Tanya stepped forward. "We're well within the noise ordinance limits, officers. The music isn't loud and will be finished by 9 p.m. as per city regulations." Karen interrupted. "Well, there are too many people. It has to be against some kind of fire code or gathering limit." Officer Rodriguez looked at Karen. "Ma'am, there's no violation for having family over on private property." Karen's face flushed red. "But what about all these cars? They're blocking the street." Officer Bennett glanced at the cars. All vehicles appeared to be legally parked. Karen was growing more frustrated by the second. "Well, I'm sure they're doing something illegal. Why don't you check for drugs or alcohol being served to minors?" Marcus maintained his composure despite the insulting implications. "Officers, you're welcome to look around. We have nothing to hide." Tanya, however, had finally had enough. She raised her phone slightly, making sure it was recording. "Excuse me, but may I ask why our family is being subjected to these accusations? Is there something specific about us that bothers our neighbor?" The question hung in the air, its meaning crystal clear to everyone present. Karen's face reddened at Tanya's question. The police officers exchanged knowing glances, having encountered similar situations before. "I don't know what you're implying," Karen sputtered, crossing her arms defensively. "This has nothing to do with who you are. It's about the noise and disruption." Officer Rodriguez took a deep breath. "Ma'am, from what we can observe, there doesn't appear to be any violation occurring here. The music is at a reasonable level, and the gathering seems well organized and peaceful. But you haven't even checked properly." Karen insisted, her voice rising. "There could be drugs, or underage drinking." Officer Bennett's expression remained professional, but his patience was wearing thin. "We have no probable cause to search these premises. We respond to observable violations, and frankly, we don't see any." More family members had begun to gather at the front of the house, curious about the commotion. Marcus's cousin Ray, who was a lawyer, stepped forward. "Is there a problem here, Marcus?" Ray asked, his tone calm but authoritative. Marcus introduced him. "This is my cousin, Raymond Washington. He's an attorney." Ray nodded politely to the officers, who nodded back with respect. Karen's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected these people to have a lawyer in the family. Her perception had been shaped by stereotypes that were now crumbling before her eyes. "Officers," Ray said, "I understand you're just doing your job responding to a call, but I hope you can see this is simply a family celebration that's well within our rights." Tanya continued recording discreetly as Karen became more agitated. "This is ridiculous," Karen exclaimed. "I called because these people—" She caught herself, realizing what she was about to say. "These people?" Tanya repeated softly, raising an eyebrow. The tension in the air was palpable. Several children had stopped playing to watch, their young faces showing confusion and concern. Officer Rodriguez decided it was time to resolve the situation. "Sir, ma'am," she addressed Marcus and Tanya, "everything appears to be in order here. You're well within your rights to host a family gathering on your property." "Thank you, officer," Marcus replied. "This can't be right," Karen protested. "I called because they're disturbing the peace." Officer Bennett turned to Karen. "Ma'am, we've assessed the situation and found no violation. Making false reports to police is a serious matter. It wastes resources and could potentially lead to dangerous situations. Karen's mouth fell open in shock. False reports? I'm a concerned citizen. Concerned about what exactly? Ray asked pointedly. Before Karen could respond, Marcus's elderly mother Gladys approached slowly with the help of her cane. At 76 years old, she had lived through the civil rights era and recognized the situation for what it was. Young lady, Gladys addressed Karen with surprising gentleness. I'd seen that look in people's eyes my whole life. You're afraid of what you don't understand. Why don't you join us instead? Break bread with us. You might find we're not so different. Karen looked horrified at the invitation. I would never. I don't want to. This isn't about, she stammered, backing away. Officer Rodriguez pulled out her notebook. Ma'am, could I get your full name and information? We need to document this call. Karen's expression changed from anger to worry. Am I in trouble? We need to file a report about the nature of this call, Officer Bennett explained. False police reports can result in citations or charges, depending on the circumstances. Other neighbors had begun to notice the police presence and were coming outside to see what was happening. Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly white woman who lived across the street, approached the group. Is everything okay, Marcus? She asked with concern. Just a misunderstanding, Marcus replied diplomatically. Mrs. Jenkins looked at Karen with disapproval. Are you the one who called the police on the Johnsons? They're the best neighbors on this block. Their gathering is the highlight of our summer every year. Karen's face fell as she realized she wasn't getting the neighborhood support she had expected. The officers continued taking her information while Tanya's phone quietly recorded everything. The family gathering had paused, with all eyes on the unfolding drama at the front of the house. What Karen didn't know was that her actions that day would soon have consequences far beyond this uncomfortable encounter. After taking Karen's information, Officers Rodriguez and Bennett stepped aside to discuss the situation privately. Meanwhile, Karen stood awkwardly as more neighbors gathered around. The Johnsons have been hosting this reunion for years, said Mr. Patel, who lived 2 houses down. My family always looks forward to the leftover barbecue they share with us the next day. Mrs. Chen nodded in agreement. Last winter when we had that terrible storm, Marcus was the first one out helping everyone clear their driveways. Karen's face grew increasingly red as she realized the Johnsons were not just accepted in the neighborhood. They were beloved. She had severely misjudged the situation. Officers Rodriguez and Bennett returned to address the group. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Officer Rodriguez began, we apologize for the disturbance to your family gathering. We see no violations here and encourage you to continue enjoying your day. Officer Bennett then turned to Karen. Ms. Wilson, we need to have a word with you privately. Karen followed the officers to their patrol car, visibly nervous as they spoke in low tones. Ma'am, Officer Bennett said firmly, the description you gave of this situation was significantly exaggerated. There's no evidence of drug use, excessive noise, or any illegal activity. Officer Rodriguez continued, false police reports are a serious matter. They divert resources from real emergencies and can create dangerous situations. I wasn't making a false report, Karen protested. I genuinely felt disturbed. Be that as it may, Officer Bennett replied, we're issuing you a warning today. Should you make similar unfounded complaints in the future, you could face charges for misuse of emergency services. Karen's mouth fell open in shock. Are you threatening me for being concerned about my neighborhood? Officer Rodriguez's expression remained firm. We're informing you of the law, Ms. Wilson. Please think carefully before calling emergency services in the future. As the officers prepared to leave, Jamal, the Johnsons' 11-year-old son, approached Karen with a plate of food. My mom thought you might be hungry, he said innocently, holding out a plate with barbecue ribs, potato salad, and cornbread. It's really good. My grandma made the cornbread special. Karen stared at the plate, momentarily speechless. The kindness in the face of her behavior made her feel something she hadn't expected, shame. Before she could respond, Tanya walked over. Officers, before you go, I'd like to show you something. She played the video she had recorded, which clearly captured Karen's words and tone. The video showed not just the conversation with the police, but also Karen's earlier confrontation with the family, including several comments with clear racial undertones that she had made before the police arrived. "I recorded this for our protection," Tanya explained calmly. "I work at Memorial Hospital, and unfortunately, I've learned that documentation is sometimes necessary." The officers reviewed the footage with serious expressions. Karen's face drained of color as she heard her own words played back. "I'd like a copy of that video for our report, if you don't mind," Officer Rodriguez said. "Of course," Tanya replied, sending it to the email address the officer provided. Karen, still holding the plate of food Jamal had given her, began backing away toward her house. "This is ridiculous. I'm being persecuted for caring about my neighborhood." As she turned to leave, she nearly bumped into someone, a well-dressed man in his 50s holding a camera with a local news station logo. "Ms. Wilson, I'm David Montgomery from Channel 8 News. We received a tip about police being called to a family gathering. Could I ask you a few questions about why you felt it necessary to involve law enforcement?" Karen froze, her eyes widening in horror. Behind the reporter, she could see a news van parking at the curb. Across the street, neighbors were watching intently, some with phones raised, recording the scene. "No comment," she mumbled, pushing past the reporter and rushing toward her house. As she fled, she could hear the reporter approaching the Johnson family instead. "Mr. Johnson, could you tell us what happened here today?" The evening news was about to make Karen Wilson infamous, and she didn't even know it yet. Karen paced anxiously in her living room, peeking through the blinds every few minutes. The news van remained parked outside, and the reporter was interviewing Marcus and Tanya. She could see them speaking calmly, their expressions serious but composed. Several neighbors had joined the conversation, nodding and gesturing toward her house occasionally. "This can't be happening," Karen muttered to herself, clutching her phone tightly. Her hands trembled as she opened her social media accounts. Already, local community groups were buzzing with early reports of the incident. Someone had posted a short clip of her confrontation with the Johnsons, filmed from a neighbor's yard. The comments beneath the video made her stomach churn. "Isn't this the new woman on Maple Street?" SNH. Classic Karen behavior. "Those Johnsons are the nicest family. This is disgusting." Karen's phone suddenly rang, startling her. It was her supervisor from Meridian Marketing, where she worked as an account manager. "Hello," she answered nervously. "Karen, it's Richard. I'm calling because we've received some concerning messages at the office. There's a video circulating that appears to show you in a confrontation with a black family. Is this accurate?" Karen's heart raced. "Richard, it's being blown completely out of proportion. I was just concerned about noise and—" Richard cut her off. "Karen, Meridian has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. We need you to come in for a meeting with HR first thing Monday morning." "But Richard, Monday, 9 a.m., he repeated firmly before hanging up. Karen sank onto her couch, her mind spinning. Her job at Meridian was her primary source of income after her divorce last year. She couldn't afford to lose it. Outside, the Johnson family gathering had resumed, though with a more subdued atmosphere. The children continued playing, but the adults spoke in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward Karen's house. "I still can't believe she called the police on us," Tanya's sister Michelle said, bouncing her baby on her knee. "What did she think was going to happen?" Marcus shook his head. "Unfortunately, it's nothing new. Just more visible now because of phones and social media." Ray, the attorney cousin, was reviewing the video Tanya had recorded. "This is textbook harassment with racial bias. You could pursue legal action if you wanted to." Tanya sighed. "I just wanted to protect our family. I didn't necessarily want things to go this far. Sometimes consequences are necessary for change." Grandma Blades commented softly. "Back in my day, people like her never faced any consequences at all." As evening approached, the news report aired on the local channel. The Johnson family gathered around Marcus's tablet to watch it. The report was titled "Racial Profiling in Oakwood Heights" and featured interviews with Marcus, Tanya, and several neighbors. "We were just having our annual family reunion," Marcus explained on camera. "We've lived here 8 years and never had any problems before." The reporter's voice continued. Neighbors say the Johnsons are valued members of the community. The camera cut to Mrs. Jenkins. They're wonderful neighbors. Always helpful, always considerate. This whole incident is shameful. Mr. Patel appeared next. Every year we look forward to their gathering. It's a highlight of our neighborhood. The report mentioned that Karen Wilson had declined to comment, though they showed brief footage of her rushing into her house. The reporter noted that the police had found no violations and had issued a warning about false reports. Karen watched the same broadcast from her living room, her face pale with shock as the full impact of her actions began to sink in. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications as the story spread online. Former colleagues, friends, and even her ex-husband had seen the news. A text message from her sister appeared. "Karen, what were you thinking? Mom and Dad raised us better than this." As night fell, Karen sat alone in her darkened living room, the blue light of her phone illuminating her tear-streaked face. Outside, the Johnson family gathering was winding down as promised, right at 9 p.m. The music had stopped, and family members were helping clean up, just as they did every year. Karen pulled her curtains closed and turned off her phone, but she couldn't shut out the consequences of her actions that were now spiraling beyond her control. Monday morning arrived with a sense of dread for Karen. The weekend had been a nightmare of social media notifications, text messages from angry acquaintances, and even a few disturbing phone calls from blocked numbers. She had barely slept, her mind racing with worry about the upcoming meeting at work. Karen dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a navy blue pantsuit and pearl earrings. She applied extra makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. As she stepped outside to her car, she noticed a piece of paper taped to her front door. It was a letter from the Homeowners Association requesting her presence at their next meeting to discuss recent neighborhood disturbances. "Perfect," she muttered, crumpling the paper and shoving it into her purse. The drive to Meridian Marketing was tense. At a red light, a driver in the next lane stared at her with obvious recognition. Karen pretended not to notice. When she arrived at the office, conversation stopped as she walked through the open workspace. Coworkers who normally greeted her with friendly smiles now avoided eye contact, turning away as she passed. Richard was waiting at the conference room with Janice from Human Resources and Thomas, the company's CEO. Their serious expressions confirmed Karen's worst fears. "Please sit down, Karen," Richard said, gesturing to the chair across from them. Janice opened a folder. "Karen, we've called you in because of a serious situation that occurred this weekend. A video showing you in what appears to be a racially motivated confrontation has gone viral. Our company has been tagged in numerous social media posts." Thomas leaned forward. "Meridian Marketing has built its reputation on inclusivity and diversity. 3 of our biggest clients have already contacted me expressing concerns about continuing to work with us if we employ someone who demonstrates such values." "But it wasn't about race," Karen protested, her voice rising. "It was about noise and disruption." Richard slid a tablet across the table. On it was Tanya's complete video, which showed Karen making several comments that were clearly racial in nature. "We've reviewed this footage carefully," Janice said. "Your words and actions directly violate our company's code of conduct and anti-discrimination policies." Karen stared at the tablet, seeing herself from an outside perspective for the first time. The woman in the video didn't look like a concerned citizen. She looked angry, entitled, and yes, prejudiced. Thomas's voice was firm but not unkind. "Karen, we're terminating your employment effective immediately. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, and HR will assist with the transition of your benefits." 45 minutes later, Karen walked out of the building carrying a box of personal items from her desk. As she placed it in her car trunk, her phone rang. It was her landlord. "Ms. Wilson, I've received several complaints from tenants in the neighborhood. As you know, your lease has a good neighbor clause." By the time Karen returned home, she felt as though her entire life was unraveling. She sat in her driveway for several minutes, unable to summon the energy to go inside. When she finally did, she found another surprise waiting. Her sister Lisa was sitting on the front steps. "What are you doing here?" Karen asked wearily. Lisa's expression was a mixture of concern and disappointment. "I saw the news, Karen. Then I saw the full video online. I came because I'm worried about you, but also because we need to talk about what you did." "You too?" Karen's voice cracked. I've already lost my job today. Probably my house too. Isn't that enough? Lisa shook her head. This isn't about punishment, Karen. It's about growth. Do you even understand why what you did was wrong? For the first time since the incident, Karen stopped making excuses. Her shoulders slumped as she sat down beside her sister. I was afraid, she admitted in a small voice. When I moved here, I had this picture in my mind of what the neighborhood would be like, and then seeing all those people who didn't fit that picture. Those people? Lisa repeated, raising an eyebrow. Karen winced at her own choice of words. See? I don't even realize when I'm doing it. Lisa put an arm around her sister's shoulders. The first step is acknowledging the problem. What you do next will determine whether this becomes just another Karen video online or a turning point in your life. Across the street, Marcus Johnson watched the sisters talking. He wondered if there might yet be hope for their troubled neighbor. 3 months had passed since the incident that changed both Karen Wilson's and the Johnson family's lives. The neighborhood of Oakwood Heights had settled back into its usual rhythm, but with subtle differences that a careful observer might notice. Karen's house now had a Thor SALE sign in the front yard. After losing her job at Meridian Marketing, she had struggled to find new employment. Every interview seemed to go well until potential employers searched her name online. The viral video had become the first thing that appeared in search results, making it nearly impossible for her to escape her past actions. The financial strain had forced her to make the difficult decision to sell her home and move to another city where her sister Lisa lived. She hoped for a fresh start where her name and face weren't immediately recognized. Today, Karen stood on her front porch watching movers load the last of her furniture into a truck. Across the street, she noticed Marcus Johnson mowing his lawn. Their eyes met briefly, and after a moment's hesitation, Karen walked across the street toward him. Marcus turned off the lawnmower as she approached. "Hello, Karen," he said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. "Hi, Marcus," she replied, her voice softer than it had been during their first encounter. "I wanted to speak with you before I leave tomorrow." Marcus nodded, waiting for her to continue. Karen took a deep breath. "I owe you and your family an apology. What I did that day was wrong on every level. There's no excuse for my behavior." "I appreciate you saying that," Marcus replied. Karen looked down at her hands, which were fidgeting nervously. "The past few months have been educational. My sister found this racial bias workshop, and I've been doing a lot of reading and self-reflection." "That's good to hear," Marcus said. "Change starts with awareness." "I know an apology doesn't undo the harm," Karen continued. "But I wanted you to know that I'm trying to learn from this mistake." Marcus studied her face for a moment before responding. "You know, my grandmother always said that the true measure of a person isn't in never falling down, but in how they get back up." Tanya came out onto their porch, curious about the conversation. After a moment's hesitation, she walked over to join them. "Hello, Karen," she said cautiously. "Tanya?" Karen nodded. "I was just apologizing to Marcus for what happened. I owe you that apology too." Tanya's expression softened slightly. "We've all had moments we're not proud of. The important thing is learning from them." A slightly awkward silence fell between them until Karen spoke again. "There's something else I wanted to tell you both. The company that bought my house, the new family moving in, is from Ethiopia. They have 2 young children. I thought, maybe you could help them feel welcome in a way that I failed to do for you." Marcus and Tanya had exchanged surprised glances. "Of course we will," Tanya said. "That's what neighbors do." As Karen turned to leave, she noticed a flyer in Marcus's hand. "What's that?" Marcus hesitated before answering. After what happened, several neighbors suggested we form a community diversity and inclusion committee. We're having our first neighborhood potluck next weekend to kick it off. "That's wonderful," Karen said sincerely. "The incident with you sparked important conversations in our community," Tanya explained. "Sometimes good can come from difficult situations." Karen nodded, blinking back unexpected tears. "I hope the committee is successful." As she walked back to her house, Karen felt a mixture of regret and relief. The consequences of her actions had been severe: lost job, damaged reputation, forced relocation, but she had also gained something valuable: perspective. Inside the Johnson home that evening, as Marcus and Tanya prepared dinner, They discussed their conversation with Karen. Do you think she's really changed? Tanya asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. I think she started to. Real change takes time. Well, her video did something positive at least, Tanya said. The community came together in a way it never had before. Marcus nodded in agreement. Sometimes it takes seeing the worst in ourselves to bring out the best in others. Outside their window, the setting sun cast a golden glow over Oakwood Heights, a neighborhood forever changed by one summer day when karma had come full circle.